So first off, again, thank you for joining us for this ATC 2021 Hiker info session. This one's going to be a little bit different than some of the other info sessions that you may have joined or that you may have read about. Specifically, the topic for this session is be an ally while hiking. Well, we can start by doing a little introduction of our own for our three different presenters. So hi folks, my name is Jacob Wildfire. Fun last name for this type of session. It is my real last name. I, again, am coming in from Alexandria, Virginia, which is traditionally Potomac lands. My history with the Appalachian Trail goes back from when I was a kid with the Boy Scout program in Western Pennsylvania and going all across the Laurel Highland Mountains and certainly the Appalachian Mountains in the Mid-Atlantic region. I am actually an ATC Next Gen member. So we have a Next Gen Advisory Council, which supports the ATC. So I'm not an ATC staff member, but I'm certainly part of the wider ecosystem. I certainly am excited for this session. Allyship is super important, and it's super important in the outdoors. So I am an out gay man and have been out for the last 5 or 6 years of my life. And so allyship for me is something that, number one, I seek to practice, but certainly I benefit from when I interact with larger groups of people on the trail. So I'm really excited for this presentation to be able to talk more about allyship and what it means to me and how I can be a better ally, but also help others to be a better ally. So excited to be here. Vaughn?
Jacob, I'm excited to be here with all of you as well. Hi, my name is Vaughn Tron. I'm the Education Network Coordinator for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. I'm calling in from Vero Beach, Florida, ancestral lands of the Seminoles, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. Similar to Jacob, allyship is very vital to me as well. I'm on a continual learning journey to become a better ally and have also continue to benefit from allyship. I'm really thrilled to be leading this discussion with you all, and I appreciate you coming into this space with us. And I also, I fell into hiking later on, more so when I was just starting college and had just turned 18. For me, I had originally felt like an outsider in the outdoors. My parents were immigrants from Vietnam. I'm a first generation citizen, and outdoor recreation and even just taking vacations or trips in general were not a priority to my parents, who were really trying to establish a second home for us here. And so I'm really grateful because really my biggest immersion into the hiking and the outdoors and everything that's kind of set me off on my journey today started with being on the AT. And so as somebody that is a person of color and also often don't feel as much of an identity with some of the outdoor recreation landscape, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak more on the importance of allyship and standing up for each other. Catherine?
Thanks, Jacob and Vaughn. Hey, y'all. I'm Catherine Herndon Powell. I'm calling in from Roanoke, Virginia, which is ancestral land of the Tutelo. My pronouns are she and her. And I work for ATC in our regional office here in Virginia. I've been doing a bunch of these hiker info sessions, and I'm super excited to do this one. That we've been looking forward to this theme and taking kind of a little bit of a different approach with this one. So I'm going to be running through some of the really basic hiking in 2021 stuff super fast in just a moment. But I will share about myself that I did through hiking 2006 on the AT and the Pacific Crest around 2010. So that shows you I'm a little bit older than Vaughn and Jacob. But I do have that through hiking experience. If anybody has those questions about, getting your permits and all that kind of stuff that we aren't going to spend a lot of time on today, feel free to ask in the chat. I am a queer woman myself. I identify as bi. I'm married to a woman now. So that was kind of a stealth element of my identity when I was through hiking, actually. But I did definitely often benefit from allyship and from people looking out for me just as a young woman hiking in my early 20s and not always feeling, super safe or welcome in certain spaces. So we thought we would share a little bit about kind of where we're all coming from. I'm going to run through this stuff just as fast as I can because, like I mentioned, we have done a lot of these hiker info sessions that go all into the nitty-gritty of planning a through hike this year. And so I would very much invite everyone to go check them out on ATC's website and on YouTube. But we'll run through some of these really quick. Vaughn, if you just want to click on through some of this stuff. The Appalachian Trail is 2,193 miles. It goes all the way from Springer Mountain down in Georgia to Katahdin up in Maine. It goes through 14 states, 6 national parks, and 8 national forests. We estimate that there are about 3 to 4 million visitors annually, possibly a whole lot more than that lately during COVID times with the day use we're getting. It is maintained, managed, and protected through the cooperative management system. That's a mouthful, I know. So the cooperative management system is the partnership of the 87 distinct land managers. That is the national parks, national forests, state parks, all the different types of public land that the trail traverses. And the 31 trail maintaining clubs. What you're seeing on the right side of your page there is a map of the trail with the different sections called out with all the logos of those 31 different clubs that are responsible for day-to-day maintenance and management of those specific sections of the trail. And then the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And we, of course, are the national umbrella organization that coordinates this incredible long-running volunteer effort to build and maintain and protect this trail. So I always want to call out whenever we're talking about the trail, if you're going to go out on a long hike, you should know that it is maintained by over 6,000 volunteers contributing over 200,000 hours of service every year. It's an amazing labor of love and a great thing to be a part of. So go ahead and look for those opportunities to join in. And when we talk about hiking the trail, you can go ahead and click a few times there, Vaughn, make those pop up. Thank you. There are lots of different ways to hike the trail. More ways to hike the trail than there are miles. But in general, we talk about through hikes being either northbound NOBO or southbound SOBO, or a flip-flop, which is when you start anywhere in the middle, go to one end and then jump back to the middle, go to the other end. Or there's lots of different ways to flip and flop, but most folks traditionally start at Harper's Ferry when they're doing that. And then of course you can section hike, which is anything, doing the whole entire trail in anything more than a 12-month period. So that could mean you do it over the course of 2 years. It could mean you do it over the course of 30 years or everything in between. And then there's day hiking. All right, we'll go to the next slide. And we invite you, if you're planning a through hike or long distance hike, to take a look at these numbers really quick and think about how they might gel with the desired experience. If you are looking for solitude and communion with the wilderness and peace and quiet and not hearing people snoring, you are not necessarily going to have that experience on a northbound hike, because that is, as you can see, the most popular direction to go. And in recent years, we've had over 4,000 people starting down in Georgia. And this is just a tool we'd like everybody to consider using if you're planning a hike of any length, whether it's a big old through hike or even just a weekend trip. It's a great idea to go and register your plans at atcamp.org. Especially if you're starting a through hike, that red line represents the capacity of the campsites in Georgia. This is for back in January 11th. The charts look a little different if you go look at the website now. Once we get above that red line, that's when we start to see a lot of crowding, a lot of impacts to the resource in terms of damage to the water quality, trampled vegetation, all that kind of thing, as well as impacts to the experience of the hikers, because no one really wants to camp right on top of each other, especially during COVID times. And just to mention, it's a lot easier to use this website on a laptop, but you can do it on your phone. And a few items we really want to mention this year for COVID-19 as to have when you think about your PPE, that essential personal protective equipment, everybody knows you've got to have your mask, you've got to have your hand sanitizer. We're also recommending you think of your personal shelter as a piece of personal protective equipment. That's your tent, your hammock, your bivvy, whatever it is you're sleeping in at night. Think of that as another thing that protects you in the COVID times, because we're really discouraging the use of shelters, since you're going to be breathing the same air as people who are outside of your household all night if you sleep in one of those. And just when you're going to go into town, make sure you're considering every point of contact and staying as safe as possible. All right.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce our subject here, but Catherine, mad props for breezing through that. so quickly and making space for us to speak more deeply on allyship and reflect as a group on it. Normally, that is not the pace of which we introduce the initial information. So as Catherine mentioned, please check out our other resources that we provided. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. So we will be covering today how to be an ally on the trail. So the overall agenda will be talking about what allyship is, why it matters specifically on the AT. We'll offer a Q&A, and then we'll break out into small group scenarios and a group discussion. And we'll wrap up and provide you all with many great resources and links for you to continue with this journey. So what is allyship? First of all, we want to know what your understanding right now is of allyship. So I'm going to first show you on my screen this Padlet that we created, and then I'll drop the link in the chat for you each to do. And I'll stop my screen share for a second, so you'll each have about a minute or two to fill out the Padlet on your own windows. But, this Padlet is an opportunity for us to see right now what your understanding of what allyship is. So type your own definition and interpretation of allyship. If y'all can see my mouse here, there is at the bottom right corner, this plus sign. And once you click on it, you can anonymously add your definition. So I know it says title and write something, so maybe you could do allyship and write the definition underneath. And then once you click outside of it, you are now, what you post is now automatically on there. And we'll update it at the end. I'll share my screen and we can all look at what each of our understandings and definitions are so far of allyship. Okay, awesome. I'm going to come back to sharing my screen now so we can all look at these answers together. All right, let's see some of these answers. Advocating for justice, equity, diversity, inclusion in all spaces. We'll hop over here. Educating ourselves, providing a supportive environment for inclusion, and pushing back against ignorant white supremacy and patriarchy. It seems like there is a strong understanding coming into this, and it's also okay if you don't. That's why we have this session. So thank you for participating in that with me. Okay, so what is allyship? An ally seeks to understand what it feels like for another person or group to be oppressed. And despite knowing you'll never fully understand how it feels, an ally is committed to valuing and supporting people who are marginalized and targeted by oppression. So being an ally means you're taking on the struggle as your own. Anyone can be an ally, and everyone can use an ally. In many situations, you can use your privilege in the moment to extend that privilege to someone else. Allyship's about listening and empathizing, immersing yourself in content and the experiences and stories of others and from groups that aren't of your own. When you listen to a diversity of marginalized voices, it can help you to understand the core of an issue. And it's a matter of stepping outside yourself and the world that you're most familiar with, especially when it comes to hearing those voices who are often unheard or have been historically marginalized. And keep in mind, being an ally is more of a verb than a noun. It's an identity. It's an active and continual process, and something that you must work at and be intentional about on a daily basis. And as an ally, it's important to be aware of and detect acts of hate or ignorance, and sometimes those can be subtle and in the form of micro and macroaggressions. So microaggressions, they can be annoying comments and offhand remarks or behaviors that are specific to someone's membership in a group that's discriminated against or subjected to stereotypes. So for example, a microaggression I often receive is, "You speak such good English for an Asian girl." And we'll be sharing a resource at the end of this that is a great video that expresses microaggressions being similar to that, like mosquito bites. So some people receive mosquito bites more than others. And even if they can seem small, they can start to chip away at a person and become very taxing and emotionally traumatizing at times. So a macroaggression is more of an overt form of aggression or racism towards a group. So an example that I also have often heard in my life is Asian people don't know how to drive. And so we point out the importance of picking up on micro and macroaggressions to understand that they often affect many marginalized people on a regular basis. And with allyship, that means that when someone, whether it be a family member, friend, or stranger, that's saying something hateful or ignorant, it's important to call them out on it. And just keep in mind, by not calling out and speaking up when you sense acts of macroaggression and these acts of hate or ignorance, you're allowing for that silence. That silence allows for more oppression to continue. So here's an overview of AT through hiker stats from 2019, and this source was compiled from the Trek magazine. So from that this pie chart, you can see that 95% of the through hikers that were recorded were white and non-Hispanic, and a majority of them, about 73%, had a high level of education, either a bachelor's degree or higher. And then just in terms of this type of demographic makeup, when we compare it to what you see on the right from the US Census Bureau, the US population by race and origin, Hispanic origin in 2019, you can see that the representation that we see among through hikers is not, it does not quite match the full representative and growing racial and ethnic diversity that exists within the US. So I'm sure you're wondering, and some folks might be aware of this, what are some of the reasons for this lack of diverse representation? Well, it's important to keep in mind that hiking involves a degree of privilege, and being able to access trails is also a part of that. Many folks might not have the gear, the time, or the resources, or even a cultural background to become familiar or to get involved in this, particularly long distance through hiking. Also, something to note is that what we know today as public lands were also once stolen lands, and our open spaces and our lands are a form of trauma and past ancestral pain for many others, whether that be the fact that they're stolen lands from Indigenous First Nations or lands that people were once enslaved on or escaped along. Even portions of the AT intersect or are portions of the Underground Railroad. There's also a history of segregation and tremendous violence that's occurred on our lands. So that is another barrier, the fact that there's a deep-rooted trauma that exists for many historically marginalized groups along what we consider today as our public lands. And there's also social and cultural barriers within our hiking society and outdoor recreation in general. And a couple things we want to point out that can come off as subtle or even overt is some exclusionary hiker behavior that can happen. And one thing, for example, is how gear can sometimes be a symbol of status on the trail. Having really nice gear can be linked to privilege, and some folks who are just getting into it, who don't have the same resource coming into hiking and being on trails, may feel intimidated and intimidated by that, and aware of the fact that they don't have that same access. So why does allyship matter specifically on the AT? So here's a great list of examples to explain kind of a deeper narrative as to how some folks could feel deeply vulnerable in a setting like the AT. But as a whole, something that we are really pushing right now as a full organizational narrative is an understanding and acknowledgement that the AT is not a separate reality from the rest of the world. The trail is prone to the same forces of hate and ignorance like racism, transphobia, or sexism, and that can make it less welcoming, less safe, and a less inclusive space. Our trail is the product of history. It's also a product of history, and it's structured and influenced by the same forces that have shaped society. So particularly as well, being on the trail can also feel like a remote and more vulnerable space for many. And hiking alone, the act of hiking is already mentally, emotionally, and physically demanding. But outside of traveling a long distance and carrying a new pack and all sorts of elements, just keep in mind that many marginalized people have to also carry with them the weight of being oppressed and targeted every day on or off the trail. So as fellow trail users, it's important that we're able to identify acts of aggression and ignorance and step up and support and relieve that burden for those who are often targeted. And so with that, why does allyship matter on the AT? Because the AT is not separate from the challenges faced by society, but it's also a place that we can forge for a better one. And with that, I'll pass the torch to Jacob and as to how we can all be an ally.
Thank you, Vaughn. Folks, when it comes to the Appalachian Trail, when it comes to through hiking and just backpacking in general, I always think about when I'm hiking, are people that I'm passing smiling at me? And usually you would think, oh yeah, that's a very universal thing. Hikers are kind people. Hikers are people that want to interact with you, that want to be social and nice. But it's certainly not a universal thing. Depending on your weight, depending on your queerness, your race, your ethnicity, your religion, there are all sorts of reasons why a person might decide not to smile with you. So, or smile at you. And so when I think about allyship, it really goes back to number one, being authentic, and number two, being kind. So how to be a better ally or how to be an ally is really starting there. Be friendly, be welcoming when interacting with others. Truly, that smile does go a long way. At the same time, don't feel as if you have to interact with others. Don't feel as if you have to give them advice. But instead, when you have those conversations, when you have those interactions on the trail, or even the larger trail ecosystem, which, as we all know, now includes things like Facebook groups or Twitter groups, that type of thing. It Kindness goes a long way. So overall, then when we think about those specific interactions with other folks on the trail, other hikers, something really to think about is, okay, if I'm going to be around them, I'm going to have several conversations with them, believe them. When someone shares something very candid with you about their race, their religion, their gender, believe them. Don't look at them. Don't give them kind of the shifty eyes of, oh, what? That didn't match what I had already assumed of you. Because that's, again, an assumption. And we as allies want to deconstruct our assumptions and see people as they are and not necessarily as we think that they should be. So just here's a starting point. Be authentic, be kind, don't make assumptions, and try to make the trail safer and more comfortable for everyone else. But second, and this is generally the harder piece, own your own privilege. So as an ally, as a white man, I have a lot of privilege. And therefore, I'm not going to have the same experience on the trail as anyone else. I'm also a gay man, but I'm a man and I'm a white man. I'm a young man. So just thinking through all of those describers, all of those attributes are things that offer me a certain privilege. Over here in the bottom left of the screen, we have a couple different bullet points. Are you white? Are you cisgender? Are you male, straight, Christian, non-disabled? There's a host of other things that we could have put there. But again, what we're saying here is recognize the attributes of your own identity, which offer you a certain amount of unearned privilege, and then use that privilege. Speak up without fear in situations where you witness harassment, you witness discrimination or intimidation, and use that privilege because that other person who's in the situation might not be able to. A couple other pieces to allyship that we're hoping to, I think each of us, as we build our own allyship skills, is starting with learning the lingo. The Jedi world, the justice, equity, diversity, inclusion world is certainly broad and is most certainly growing. It changes every year, and it's because we started from a place that was pretty unhealthy and pretty disrespectful to a lot of groups. And every year, through academic study and just through more inclusive empathy, we're gaining a lot of new linguistics, so a lot of new words to address kind of this issue. So we put 5 up here on the screen. I think through our initial session with the Padlet, we can see a lot of you are already familiar with this world, with these issues. But some of these are newer words, and so we wanted to put them out for you on this screen. Something that you might hear in talking about Jedi issues is this acronym BIPOC. So it refers to Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And it's certainly a recognition of systemic racism and how years and years in history within this country and even globally, BIPOC people have been treated differently and more poorly. Certainly another phrase or vocab word that we want to talk about is cisgender. So I think most people in this call will understand transgender, that of which you align to a gender that is opposite of that which was assigned at birth. Cisgender is, okay, it's the same gender that was assigned at birth. So for me, as a cisgender male, I'm going to have a lived experience that's very different than a person who's a transgender male. Intersectionality certainly is a huge phrase in the Jedi world these days that says, hey, I'm not just a white man, I'm not just a Christian, I'm not just a gay person, but I'm all three of those things at once. So intersectionality really recognizes that a person has multiple identities that all offer layers upon each other. Neurodiversity, another concept that is slightly newer in the Jedi lingo, that there's great diversity in how my brain works compared to yours, and how everyone on the trail is going to have a huge amount of neurodiversity that should be valued. Certainly when we talk about cultural appropriation, we talk about, okay, what does it mean to take a cultural element from one group and use it for myself, often without understanding the full backstory of that cultural element, and not giving it necessarily the respect that it deserves. And lastly, equity, which is certainly pivotal to all of this conversation here. It's the fair treatment, the access, opportunity, advancement for all people, while striving to identify specific barriers that have prevented those groups from participating fully. So it goes not just at fairness, but also at history of, okay, what does it mean that this community was treated this way in the past, and how can we again move forward into the future? Second, what does it mean when someone shares their pronouns with you? At the beginning of this call, I think both Vaughn and Catherine did. I think I forgot to. I go by he, him, his. But what does that mean? So it means that we are sharing our gender identity with you and telling you what I prefer to be called. So again, you're probably familiar with he, him, his, she, her, hers. That's what we were taught in elementary school. But there are some gender neutral pronouns which are becoming more popular, certainly as people are more comfortable expressing themselves in different ways. So one is referring to oneself, singular, as they, them, theirs. For example, Ryan ate their food because they were hungry. So that's pretty standard, pretty easy to understand. Again, they, them, theirs was part of our elementary school curriculum as well. A new one for folks on this call might be Z, Zir, and Zir. Tyler ate Zir food because Z was hungry. Again, Z is pronounced Z-E-E, and Zir is pronounced like here. So those two might be new for you. But overall, again, when someone is on the trail and says, hi, my name is Jacob, I go by he, him, his, that's often a really great opportunity for you to say the same thing right back. Hi, my name is blank, and these are my pronouns. For passing interactions where you're not actually going to have that much of a relationship with that person, you're not spending too much time with them, one thing we really encourage is practice using gender neutral greetings. So instead of saying, hi, you guys, or good morning, ladies and gentlemen, maybe consider saying, howdy, y'all. How's everyone doing? Good morning, folks. And this was actually, I hate to say it, hard for me to keep in mind. I used to be a middle school teacher, and every single morning I would greet my 6th grade students with, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I realized over the years that, hey, why was I doing that? Why was I creating these 2 different genders when really some of my students already were thinking about the gender spectrum and where they themselves fit along that spectrum. So one last thing on this slide, down at the bottom in red and blue, I hate to even have to say this, but never refer to a person as an it or as a he, she. These are generally considered very offensive slurs that are typically used against the trans community or the gender non-conforming community. So again, if they provide you pronouns like they, them, theirs, or z, zir, zir, use it. Do not go ahead and create your own assessment of that person or use the word it or he, she as a way to objectify that person. That is definitely a no-no. That is bad. Learning the lingo moving forward with disabilities, certainly on the trail, you're going to see a lot of people who look different than you, whether it's their height, their weight, their skin color, but also their physical ability. And the AT is famous for a bunch of folks now who have hiked the whole trail with a whole host of different abilities. Certainly, there's a great story of I think the first blind person that hiked the entire AT a couple years ago. But when referring to these different people with disabilities or differing abilities, there's some things to keep in mind. So number one, and I think this is pretty basic, but again, not using the word the and then a disability. For example, the blind. Again, it is to be a better ally, to be very intentional about the language you use. It's important to think about language with a person-first mentality. So people who are blind, people who happen to be X, Y, or Z. Again, that's if you're going to talk about a larger group of people. Number one, not calling out a person's disability is often the best way to go. For example, in this second bullet point you see on the screen, some people might want to be, might think that they're being very intentional by saying, oh, look at you, you're being more heroic, courageous, or special because of your disability. But I think a lot of people, maybe with these intentions, don't realize, wow, that can actually be kind of offensive, that I am not giving that person the benefit of the doubt in thinking through, okay, they are just another person on this trail. Why am I othering them? Why am I making them feel like someone outside of the norm, outside of the standard? So just 3 slides there on lingo regarding allyship on the trail. And again, Vaughn touched on this a little at the beginning, but when we talk about the word allyship, it's not necessarily about racial allyship or sexual allyship. There's a of different identities that are more vulnerable and historically marginalized. And each of these different identities, you can be, you again can use your privilege to be an ally towards them. So, okay, we now know a little bit about allyship. We know why it's important on the trail, and we know some words, some lingo, some vocabulary around it. But next off, we want to say, okay, what if you actually are on the trail? How can I be very present in being an ally? So the first thing that we're going to say is, number one, look for some visual clues. Look for some intentional markers that people may use to indicate their own identity. For me, on my backpacking backpack, I have a huge gay pride flag. But I know for some other people, they have tattoos, they have jewelry, illustrating, a whole host of things. So be conscious of that. For me, That's certainly a scary thing, putting that on my backpack, but for me, it's also a huge source of pride and excitement. So for example, when a person is hiking on the trail and they see me with my backpack with that rainbow pride flag, I love when people say, hey, I saw your patch. I really like that. I like that flag. For me, that's a really nice, subtle, easy, very non-offensive way to just say, to tip me off, to say, hey, I'm an ally. Like, I appreciate you. I appreciate your identity, and I'm going to call it out. So that's visual clues. Another might be a verbal clue. So what is your fellow backpacker describing themselves as? Are they, again, using gender neutral pronouns? Are they referring to their spouse as a partner? Listen to these things that don't necessarily make it, 1,000% obvious, but be intentional about, oh, this is what this person said, and then I'm gonna incorporate their language into my vocabulary. That's how I'm going to call them. Lastly on here, we have stay alert. And this is certainly really important when we talk about being an ally, because being an ally is about creating safety. So is someone on the trail in trouble? Are they subtly calling out for help? And 3 ways they might do this are listed here. Are they asking to hike with you? Are they asking to get a hitch with you into town? And is someone pretending to know you, potentially in order to get away from someone else? So certainly being cognizant, being very thoughtful about how the people around you are interacting with you. At the same time, it's really important to not make assumptions. So be thoughtful, listen, be attentive, but don't take it upon yourself to assume or guess everything about someone else. As Vaughn mentioned, many people on the trail are going to have varying degrees of experience. So number one, certainly don't assume that you are the most experienced person. But also, if you are, a person who's been backpacking their whole life, 10, 20, 30 years, don't assume that I, Jacob Wildfire, want your help or your input or even your presence. Wait to be asked. Again, as an ally, it's good to, initially just put yourself out there, but at the same time, not to put yourself on top of someone, to force yourself into their life. And lastly, on the bottom, I think we all know this, but when it comes to hiking clothes, there are so few variations between what items are for men versus women versus different colors. When we're hiking on the trail, as we're through hiking, getting dirty and gross, don't assume necessarily that you know what someone's gender is or what their gender identity is. All of these clothes, all of these styles, it can be anything, and maybe that person's in the middle of some type of gender transition. So that's just something to be thoughtful as you're hiking the trail.
Thank you, Jacob. So, when someone is being targeted physically or verbally, intervene only with their permission. Focus on supporting them rather than engaging with the aggressor. And here are some steps for the intervention. So, interruption means to listen, watch, step up, and speak up. Don't let conversation go unaddressed. If there is a phrase that can be harmful, intersect there and say and let that be known. If you're witnessing something bigger, you can be louder about it. You can make sure that you are staying with the victim so that they are back to a position where they can feel safe and secure. And secondly, question the situation. The goal with questioning is to better understand why the person said that. And it also helps to mirror to them back their own words. Sometimes we all are guilty of being loose with our language and our thoughts sometimes. So to repeat back what that person says gets them to think. So common thing that we've been hearing lately with COVID-19 is, why do you call it the Chinese virus, for example? So it might take more than one conversation, but it's okay for it to be uncomfortable. If you have the privilege to speak up and raise this question, do it. And then educating. And the key with educating is providing the facts, not just providing the facts, but explaining why the person has said or done something that might need some reframing and rethinking, and try to focus on being empathetic in that process. And I know it's hard, our emotions get stirred. There might be a situation where you feel like it's unsafe for us or for the person that was originally targeted, but take a moment to pace yourself and come back to that sense of exchanging humanity with another person, because ultimately, hopefully, everyone wants to receive that same compassion and empathy. And so if someone doesn't understand why a comment they made might have been racist, you can educate them, for example, of the long history of stereotyping for immigrants, if they're saying something against immigrants or anything. I know, like I said before, with a common microaggression I receive is you speak good English for an Asian girl. I was actually born in the States. And with that, oftentimes I feel a little bit exhausted when people first off ask me where I'm from. I'm not quite sure what they mean by that. I'm asked that so often and more readily than my other white colleagues or peers. And so just keeping in mind all the subtleties to which a person who's often marginalized or could be targeted could feel quite taxed and need someone to intervene and speak up for them and maybe redirect the conversation, and then echo each other, have each other's backs. When you witness an instance where someone's speaking up for others and stepping up as an ally, amplify their message, give them support. And this encourages more people to speak up, and it reinforces that there are others who also believe in this message. And especially so specifically if you're on the trail, and oftentimes we continue to cross paths with each other, right, from shelter to shelter or hostel. So if you continually see someone along multiple points and they're continuing to act in a way that is hateful or ignorant, give yourself time to plan out the conversation and anticipate what might happen, and also rehearse your reaction. And the concept of de-escalation is ways to provide support. It's not so much a suppression of feelings or trying to diminish the situation. It's really about, again, responding and seeing each other with humanity and compassion that each of us would want to be seen and treated with. Keep in mind that the best way to stay safe and to navigate situations is to continue to stay rational and calm, both for yourself, for the person being targeted, and also don't just let it go. These are examples of acts of micro and macroaggressions that are pretty common along the trail, and I feel like many of us can identify with these instances. So have you seen a racist comment written down in a shelter log? Visited a hostel with a Confederate flag displayed on the premises? I know with this era of social media trolling, I'm sure most of us have seen on a Facebook thread a minority being singled out or attacked. When you see moments like that, there are strategies for speaking up and speaking and intervening. And so you could go to the place of business, and inform the managers, let them know why you're leaving, let them know of the incident that's happening. You could also be more vocal in public about it and write about it in Yelp and inform other hikers to make them be aware. You can set limits within your sphere of control. You can just set those boundaries. We are traveling from place to place on the trail, but you can still continue to carry your same boundaries with you and let them be known. So you can tell people, don't tell racist jokes in my presence. You can also not feed into the energy and just give them a silent, a direct stare with like direct eye contact, and make them feel awkward and not engage. So there are different examples for that. And also, the biggest thing is that we'll make mistakes. We're all learning. We're all also unlearning. So if you mess up, just own it. It can happen so easily, and a part of making learning lessons is also just making mistakes along the way, and just welcome the discomfort. Because when you encounter something that makes you uncomfortable, which will often happen in this, just don't dismiss it. Sit with it and ask yourself why, and welcome it as an opportunity to grow. Also, there's opportunities to show up. When someone from a marginalized community invites you to an event, go. Be there to listen, learn, and show your support. The most important thing is just staying engaged and continue learning. Oppression is constant, and keep in mind that marginalized people don't have the privilege of turning off and turning away from the oppression that's happening to them. So being an ally is an ongoing journey. It's a daily, long-term commitment, and this is a great a quote by Amélie Lamont, who also wrote Guide to Allyship, which is also a resource we'll share with you at the end of this. So many would-be allies fear making mistakes that could have them labeled as ist or ick, so racist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic. But as an ally, you're also affected by a system of oppression. This means that as an ally, there's much to unlearn and learn. Mistakes are expected. You need to own this as a fact and should be willing to embrace the daily work of doing better.
Folks, this is the first time that ATC has done this session. And so thank you for being part of it for us. We obviously, this is a huge, important concept. And none of us are going to become incredible allies from the get-go. This is something that, as Vaughn mentioned, is a verb. It's something that we have to practice and get better at and sometimes get uncomfortable with. By asking a lot of questions, by doing some work to, again, make sure that you are being the best ally that you can possibly be in preparation of your hike. It's super vulnerable out there for some of us. It's super scary. And even for some of us, we have our own histories of being intimidated or being harassed in the outdoors. And I wish that everyone was being a part of this session to learn, hey, how could we interrupt that? How could we intervene in that so that other people don't have those same experiences? So I think with that, again, huge thanks to all of you for joining. Huge thanks to you, Catherine and Vaughn, for helping to facilitate.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
See ya.